This is the stablecoin peg stability mechanism workshop. So really excited to be talking about the different stability mechanisms out there and how they impact DeFi and beyond. We are joined by a great group of panelists today. Maybe we can start off with just quick introductions. Maybe Mike?
Yeah. Let me start. I'm Mike. I'm from Tsunami Protocol, and Tsunami Protocol is decentralized protocol which create yield generation stablecoins whose collateral is utilized by our Omnipool and distributed through different profit generation strategies. So, and I want to talk about our solution today. It was inspired by Frax algorithmic market operation controller, and we create our own, but I will tell later.
I am from Silo Finance. We have isolated money markets. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Hey everyone, this is Larry the Cucumber. I do developer relations at Reserve Protocol, formerly founder of Pickle Finance. And Reserve is a project, a DeFi protocol, which provides smart contract factories for anyone to develop their own asset-backed currencies. It could be stable coins, it could be volatile crypto indexes, whatever, and hopefully share a bit more about how we approach stablecoins.
Hey everyone, thanks a lot for having us. I'm Hubert from StakeDAO. So StakeDAO, to put it in a nutshell, it's a governance token liquid staking protocol. So we have a lot of liquidity questions when it comes to maintaining the liquidity of those LSDs, right? And we also have several liquidity maintenance tools such as Vote Market or even like boosted liquidity providing solutions. So yes, very happy to talk about liquidity stability, right?
And I'm Paul. I'm the protocol lead at Gauntlet. So Gauntlet is a financial modeling platform that serves DeFi protocols. We started off as a research shop. So our original work was around writing a lot of research on L1s, stability mechanisms, risk management, etc. And we have then productized that into a platform that serves DeFi protocols. Primarily, we do risk management, protocol optimization, mechanism design, and treasury management. So on the stablecoin front, we have our clients now and in the past, in terms of our research work, have included Liquidity and Maker. So yeah, excited to kick off this conversation. There's obviously a ton of different stability peg mechanisms out there. In your mind, what are some of the high-level mechanisms, and what are their respective advantages and disadvantages? And maybe we can start off with Mike from Tsunami.
I think maybe guys, so you have better answer. I mean, for the aggregation before, because you was in research, no?
I'm sorry?
No. I mean, I can introduce our own mechanism, and maybe guys.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. So in Tsunami, we started with Omnipools. When our user deposit the stables to Omnipool, and then it distributes to different profit strategies. And these Omnipools users receive LP tokens, which increase in the price when we after compound the revenue from the strategies. It was our base. Then we understand that we can create stables based on such Omnipools as collateral. So collateral, when the LP price go up, we rebase our stable coins. And then we understand, we see how the DeFi evolving, and we see how Frax is making the peg mechanism. I'm talking about algorithmic market operation controller, which deflate and inflate the amount of token in trading pools. And we have this inspiration. And what our interesting idea, we use our Omnipool to provide this, we name it automated peg stabilizer. So we have Omnipools, it's provide revenue, our stables, and we deploy another version of our Omnipool, which make this stabilization and how it works. We put the liquidity, like staking liquidity of our stables in this omnipool, and then it inflate and deflate the amount of our stables inside curve or another trading pool. So we like our own LPs. And for example, if it is insufficiency in curve pool of our token, we can withdraw USDC, deposit to our main omnipool, generate our stables and put it back. And the amount can go and forward and backward. And it's the basic idea that revenue generation and the stability makes the same technology, which proof in battle and with audits, and it works.
Yeah. Well, I guess the broader question was.
Different trade-offs.
Yeah. So the three main categories of, what determine peg are broadly fiat collateralized stablecoins, crypto collateralized stablecoins, CDP type models, liquidity maker, or algorithmic stablecoins, which we will not speak of for the most part, I think, because those are they come with too many risks, not kind of in vogue now. Maybe the next bear market, next bull market. But what it sounds like, with Frax's solution, or how you evolved off Frax, is fractionally collateralized, mostly fiat. Well, all fiat, and as it earns yield, it will mint more to out of the generated yield, such that the net asset value of one UZD is $1. That's my understanding. Okay. So yeah, so there's now a couple more flavors of sort of that simple distinction. Fiat stablecoins traditionally being just USDT, USDC, but now it comes with more variety. You'd be able to speak best to the crypto asset backed ones where CDP type models.
Yeah.
You wanna?
Absolutely, yeah, sure. Absolutely, yeah. I think the vast flavor of stablecoins right now, the one like Ave's recent Go is, and of course Makers and is and even Silo Finance, we have a stablecoin on a kind of a smaller scale is basically CDP type. Some of them, they usually have a PSM model where that kind of stabilizes, it always redeem to kind of stabilize the mechanism, stabilization mechanism basically. But the CDP model is basically deposit, deposit a stable coin, deposit a crypto asset, and then you could mint this stable coin. And that's one of those. The disadvantage of that, at least we've seen it with DAI. The first version was basically not very stable, so they introduced the PSM model, and that kind of stabilized that. But also the other factors that helped DAI kind of stabilize. We'll get to that later, I think, and on this panel. That's kind of like really the broader model. So the disadvantage is it's basically that. The advantages of it can scale if you can find good collateral to accept to mint a token. You start with ETH, and then you can add. Obviously you can add other stable coins, but they're not necessarily like volatile assets. So that's a way, and then you probably add other stable coins that are not necessarily stable in nature, and that it basically scales. Now, that's to my understanding like the advantages and disadvantages of this type of model. I think, if you look at the success of DAI, I think it's pretty much succeeded and scaled. I think pretty much. That's one. That's the second one. Now I think there's a third type, which is the algorithmic ones that we've talked about. Like the recent ones that we have is is basically, I think, Curve USD is, you can consider, obviously Liquidity is the premier a protocol that introduced that, and I think it's pure ETH backed, so that's for a lot of users that's a big advantage. If you're a decentralization maxi, you probably use LESD, I think, and it's the kind of like paradoxical use case is that it's actually your refuge. If there's any bad event out there in the economy or DeFi in general, you would actually want to own and mint LESD because but that does not necessarily improve it. Does not encourage you to own it in that during that time, because if you actually mint DAI, you have a short on this crypto asset, because you would want DAI to go down in value, so you could repay your debt with just less at a discount. So that doesn't necessarily encourage. So for the LESD users, not necessarily, it does not encourage users to own it. Some of them in a bad environment. So that's pretty much kind of like an overview of them. I think we've covered like pretty much 3 use cases or 3 different types of stablecoins right now. Yeah. Want to add anything?
Yes, I think in terms of peg maintenance. With the Tsunami, on réserve stablecoin qui sert basically savings account or on the stablecoin. You have direct arbitrage. Same for like centralized stablecoins as basically takes very quickly takes, and that's fairly easy. You don't need to overpay provision to maintain the peg. When you don't have arbitrage direct. When you hello. When sorry. Okay. When
It's a bit loud, right?
hello.
Okay, let's just drop the microphones. Yeah, we don't do that anymore.
Yeah, I think everyone can hear us, right?
Yeah, you can hear us, right?
Yeah, it's the live. Yes, but you don't hear anything if you keep. You catch it? Okay, so okay. Okay, perfect. So what was I saying? I was saying when you don't have arbitrage opportunities, then so for example for CDPs like stablecoins you mint with debt, either like for example liquidity, it often depeg upward because you cannot arbitrage easily downward the LUSD. But it's for meme it's kind of the same the other way around, right? You can buy it at a depeg to repay your debt, but if you don't have a debt, you cannot really arbitrage, right? So for those stablecoins, you need to heavily incentivize liquidity through various pools. Generally, the home for stablecoins is Curve, obviously. Balancer forked the Curve stable swap contract, so it's also a good solution. Maverick just went out a few months ago and has some kind of evolution of Uniswap v3 contract, which allows for concentrated smart liquidity provision. So that's one thing, how to set up your pool, and then you need to pour a lot of money in terms of incentives to make sure people actually take the risk of the depeg. And then it becomes a war of who gets the more money to be able to incentivize more, etc. And if you incentivize with your own governance token, it has some limits, because obviously it sooner or later starts going down, and then the incentive goes down as well, etc. So I think what we are working on at StakeDAO, for example, for it's not stable coins, but it's liquid staking derivatives, so it's same stuff. Is having a liquidity maintenance fee out of the yield generated by the asset that will be used to pay bribes, to pay like vote incentives, or to acquire some voting power, which will enable long-term liquidity incentivization and stuff. But there's no perfect solution. And I think we will see a lot of engineering around that. I think Frax has been fairly innovative in that space with their Fraxis, notably. But it's another topic. It's more, they've been very aggressive on their liquidity maintenance and actually generating a lot of revenue out of the liquidity maintenance. So what was a liability, they made it a strength. It's very interesting.
They basically made it so that if you're not LPing it, you're donating your yield away. Yeah. Which is clever, but a little devious.
Yeah. And I think also the design that has some limits in the sense that you always need deep liquidity at the peg. That's why they maintain like a large curve pool, and they farm a lot of tokens, and they can bribe and buy back the token and bribe. But in other designs, it doesn't cost as much. You don't need that much liquidity. I think liquidity stable pools like these pools that stabilize, you don't need them to be in such depth to maintain to always liquidate in case ETH price drops. So yeah.
I think we're transitioning into that.
Yeah.
Secondary market.
Yeah, so yeah, we kind of touched upon like secondary markets and how that impacts the peg. Obviously, the peg is impacted by not just the internal mechanisms, but also the mechanisms in both even tangential lending markets as well as secondary markets. So yeah, can we talk about that and touch upon those topics?
Yeah. As I said before, that our protocol is basically use this flow of value from our trading pools to our omnipools, to our stables, and we use this actively. We are close, I think, with functionality to Frax, but we are for now less aggressive than them with liquidity provision, and also we use our own omnipools. I mean that we deploy for each our stable coins. We have two types of pools, and one for bringing revenue, another one for use this stabilization mechanism. And of course, inside we think to how we can. Right now we're working only with trading pools. I mean Curve. I mean other pools, but inside we investigate the opportunity to use also lending pools, but with lending pools we see some differences, difficulties, and right now we can't use them.
Okay. Yep. I'll take it next. Yeah, I find this question particularly interesting because I find that the term secondary market for stablecoins is a bit of a misnomer. There's a lot of levers and influence a DeFi protocol can put into deciding how the secondary market plays out. For example, with Maker or Liquidity, neither of them are hard pegged at $1. Maker is now, but LUSD floats between $1 and $1.10 because of one, its redemption, and two, its system collateral ratio. So sometimes it still floats above. Maker has solved this with the PSM, which I find to be just another form of a secondary market. You could trade DAI 1-for-1 with USDC, USDT, and even traditional secondary markets, Curve, MIM places tremendous influence on how the MIM price is, with a ridiculously high A factor, such that it never really deviates, and in doing so, it helps it maintain a hard peg of 1. And you might say stuff like this is obvious. You want your stablecoin to stay at $1, but it doesn't always go the right way. For example, with the LST protocol Libra Finance, they have the EUSD stablecoin, which is over collateralized by STETH. And I don't know if mistakenly they created a Curve V2 pool for EUSD, such that it's treated as a volatile asset. It doesn't really opinionatedly stay at $1, and so it's pegged upwards to 1.07, I think, and that represents a risk for its users. Its debt asset is appreciating, and so there's a lot of levers and interesting ways to approach secondary market pegging.
Yes, sure. And so to go a bit further, I started the subject a bit earlier, but to go a bit further, I think when you think about it, liquidity provision, it's kind of a lending dynamic, right? You're lending some of your, say, hard stablecoins to guarantee the liquidity of another stablecoin. And so it's a lending where the value of what you lend actually fluctuates with the peg. I think smart ways to incentivize liquidity around the peg is to have probably several pools with different A factors on Curve. So that would mean for everyone, it would mean that on a certain range of trading, the peg will be extremely stable. And then if you go a bit further, then you will see much more of a XY equal K price movements. So you keep something which is solid, arbitrable, but that can have large volumes around the peg. That's interesting. I think using lending, as we were discussing just before this panel, using lending pools to have a hard peg up to a certain point before this goes to using a normal liquidity pool and having like soft pegs can also be a way. So yes, just like a few ideas around that. And then can we speak about the secondary market? I think the point of a stablecoin is to be used, is to be like a currency, right? So it's not really a secondary market. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything.
Yeah, just to add on, I thought Libra was a particularly interesting case study. In addition to kind of having like a V2 curve style pool, in some ways there was kind of a meaningful supply and demand side imbalance there, because it was just like pretty profitable to just hold EUSD and get, I think, 8% yield off of that. So the demand to obviously hold was a bit higher than the demand to mint the stablecoin. So that kind of led to the temporary depeg upwards. Kind of moving forward, we kind of talked about the different trade-offs around scalability, security, and decentralization. At this point, we're kind of seeing maybe a trend towards some stablecoins prioritizing scalability and growth, maybe over the other parts of the trilemma. What are your thoughts on that kind of shift towards growth and maybe RWAs and other sources of collateral versus just having crypto native collateral assets?
I think the race for growth is actually quite critical. A stablecoin with low, I mean, it depends on what you want to do with your stablecoin. If it's a savings account, then you don't care really much about size, right? Obviously, the bigger, the more successful will be your protocol. But if you aim to have a stablecoin that is used as a currency, at some point you need it to be in every pocket, right? So obviously that can need stablecoin protocols to take a bit of risk on the on aggressive growth with the low liquidity pools, etc. I think that the real world asset trend is very interesting. I really like what Undo Finance is doing those past few months with the Flux protocol, so that they really allow everyone to benefit from treasuries yield, without having to KYC, etc. Because you actually benefit from this yield by lending money to people who are KYC'd and are able to buy those treasuries and or tokenized treasuries. So it's extremely interesting. I think this will be the floor for having a good like risk-free rate in crypto, which is decent. Obviously, in the past bear market, we suffered a lot from the fact that rates in traditional finance went up and down in DeFi, and I think it was a major catalyst of this drop in TVL. I know for a fact that a lot of funds who were using DeFi as yield sources to generate 10%, 12% returns could just have treasuries for 4% and would be very happy with that. So obviously this real world asset trend is extremely interesting and should be like a key part of the next bull run, I think.
Yeah, I'd probably add something. Well, it's really about the collateral type, the quality of it, and the perceived value. You know, we have fiat money today. That's a real world asset backing, like with USDC and USDT, and fiat money, and of course something closer to it like T-bills and all those things. And it's really about you know, do you trust the system or not? Do you trust it or not? I don't know. I think we've seen with the recent you might have your money deposited as a circle, have money deposited with at a certain bank, and the bank doesn't keep the right reserves, and all of a sudden this stablecoin becomes under collateralized, and that creates some serious issues. And so that system, how transparent it is, it's more of the system, it's more of the system you have set in place. So if you want to call that system as an oracle that keeps track of the funds backing or the type of collateral backing the stablecoin, well, the fiat money backed stablecoin, that's one system that you need. You also need to track all these systems around it, and I think it's all about this. That's how a certain stablecoin backed by real world asset becomes resilient. Now, the second aspect is what is, again, the collateral type we're talking about. Is it just something closer, something you can liquidate? Is it like T-bills? Okay, that's okay, or fiat money. But then if you go beyond that, for example, gold, I think is something that hasn't seen a lot of. There are a couple of protocols doing that, which is kind of like they issue a claim on actually physical gold. But then there also you're talking about, you need a legal framework around it. What if something happens and you need to seize that? You want to claim that gold, maybe probably you never have to claim it, but if you claim it, so how do you do that, right? It depends then on the reputation of the issuer. And then if you go beyond that, for example, what if you have this building, if you want to tokenize it and issue a stable coin and say like, well, this is, you know, so it's quite complicated. I think right now where we're looking at is pretty much fiat money and gold and maybe some kind of like you know, securities that are super liquid, that can be liquid and backed by were reputable entities like American government, for example.
Yeah, from just, you know, a liquidation perspective, like if the real world assets are not very liquid and can't be atomically liquidated by liquidators, then yeah, it just probably liquidity has to be very important even for the real world assets on chain. You know, speaking, you know, about growth, we'd love to pick your brains a little bit more we talked about how stablecoins can be adopted more broadly. To you, what do you think are the main what needs to happen in order for us to see like the next big wave of stablecoin adoption and growth?
Yeah, I just want to touch on the last point just a little more on sort of how to approach that trilemma. Make or Die being a good case study of how people sort of say how it's lost its path by becoming just wrapped USD and USDC, and I find that view to be reductive. It does a lot more than that. Its primary growth strategy now is an RWA. It's still got a ton of ETH collateral. Of course, the PSM sacrifices a little bit of that decentralization for a lot more scalability and stability. And so that's that's the right approach to take. You kind of approach all three tenets of a successful stablecoin, and of course other stablecoins such as Liquidity's LUSD can be decentralization maxis and still succeed that way. But we've seen Maker scale, and I don't think that's a bad approach at all. And so about that, the path to adoption, diversification is one, and I want to bring Reserve as an example of how it's sort of integrated real world Rails into crypto. Reserve, there's a DeFi protocol part of it, but there's also a money services app where it allows people in Latin America to access the American dollar and transact with vendors because they face the problem of hyperinflation. And under the hood, it's powered by DeFi. It's called EUSD, which Libra has also annoyingly called their stablecoin. But that's one of the ways, and a couple of the other important factors I mentioned, it being a diversified asset, being put in real world scenarios, is one of those big paths to adoption. And true UX is allowing the end user to not need to know how to deal with crypto, not know they're dealing in crypto, and under the hood they could be swapping in all of these long tail assets essentially for USDC liquidity, but ultimately they're paying for a burger, and that's what the end game of stablecoin hopefully looks like.
Just want to add something. So from an issuer's perspective, if I'm thinking about a growth strategy for an issuer, from a stablecoin issuer, I would be thinking about, of course, number one, liquidity layer. You want your stablecoin to be highly liquid, so users so it becomes sticky, so it becomes accessible for users. Now, there's something that probably I will touch on is the role of lending markets, just in terms of growth from an issuer's perspective. Before we get to the user, and I've seen this being ignored a lot by stablecoin issuers. So why do, in my opinion, stablecoins need lending markets? And this is something DAI has done really successfully with obviously piggybacking Aave. Number one, lending markets actually create demand for a stablecoin. Think about, so to use an analogy, think about, well, there is natural gas and there is oil, and there's cars, but cars create demand only for oil, not for natural gas. So put it in the perspective of lending. Well, you've taken a loan, you've denominated an asset with a stable coin. Now you need to pay interest. Well, how do you pay interest? There is a repayment that happens. So you have to pay it in the same stable coin that you borrowed. So that creates more demand. So more demand, so basically that's how one aspect how to grow it. Now, the lending markets also have two positive impacts on the stability of the stablecoin, which is a major UX point for users holding the stablecoin. So number one, if you denominate debt in a stablecoin, now there is interest that need to be, so basically you denominate the debt in stablecoin, and let's say this stablecoin goes to 95 cents. And this, if there is a user, so basically if there is a user with debt, has debt in a stablecoin, at that moment the user is motivated to actually repay at a discount. And this is great for the stability of the stablecoin. So that's number one aspect of the positive aspect of lending markets on stablecoins. So it's a sort of perpetual bid from a user perspective. So the second one, which is actually interesting, it's the short squeeze that you create, because you borrow, let's say $100 in a year, assuming there's 10% interest. Now you have to repay 110. So this $10 is actually a short squeeze on the stablecoin. And that helps with the stability of the stablecoin. So these two aspects between the perpetual bid, because you'll always be a user willing to repay the debt once this, if it depegs. And the second one, which is I think equally important, which is short squeeze, because you always generate interest and you have to repay it in the same stablecoin. These two aspects impact the stability of the stablecoin. Now, these two aspects, from an issuer perspective, create this kind of perfect stablecoin. And now we can move into kind of like, how do I make it accessible for users? I mean, of course, the on-ramp systems and DEXs and everything else. So just wanted to touch on that also related to the growth of the stablecoin. Oh, I'm sorry.
In Tsunami, we of course are interested in liquidity staking derivatives and the huge growth of such market, and how we can connect this liquidity staking derivative with trading pools, because we are using our own mechanic to move money from liquidity staking derivative to the trading pools and back, and using our own tokens, stable tokens, for such case. And of course, I think we will see a lot of innovation in such space, because it's huge market and it will only grow.
Yeah, and to add on to a little bit to the lending piece as well. Yeah, totally agree. Like, usage is key here. Composability is key. And generally, when listing stablecoins on lending markets, the risk to the lending market is lower if the stablecoin is only enabled for borrowing, not as a collateral. And it seems like that is kind of one of the major use cases, is lending out your stablecoin so it can be borrowed for leverage or otherwise. So generally speaking, when stablecoins are trying to list on lending protocols, if collateral is not enabled but borrowing is enabled, that generally increases the chances that the community will support that type of listing. And in terms of the adoption, I like how we kind of broke it out between kind of the issuer perspective and the user perspective. From I guess the issuer perspective, it seems like one of the challenges moving forward will be how can we equalize, or I guess make DeFi yield more competitive with off-chain yield. That seems to be one of the main strategies behind makers. Kind of end game is we know that DeFi yield is more volatile than off-chain yield. So kind of bridging the gap there creates more stickiness from that perspective. And on the user side, I think maybe thinking more long term, zero knowledge is probably going to be a major driver. If we can actually integrate that with stablecoin users, now you can like purchase things, and people don't necessarily need to know about what you're buying out there. So that's probably like a longer term development. I think we've talked a ton about USD denominated stablecoins. Those are obviously not the only types of stablecoins. What are your thoughts on non-USD denominated stablecoins, yours or otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, no, yes, I guess the first one that comes to mind after dollar is euro, right? And so at StakeDAO, we are fairly close to a protocol called Angle, which issues a euro stablecoin called AG Euro. They're also working, I think, on a gold stablecoin. I mean, at least I saw a proposal about it, but that was before the Euler hack, so I don't know where it is now. Maybe a bit lost, but yet they have managed to build a strong euro stablecoin that quickly became the biggest, I think, in terms of volume, and also probably in terms of supply. and it's a fully decentralized one, which has had a very interesting design, where people could take the risk. It was backed by stable dollars, because there is a legal issue in Europe where if you back by actual euro, I'm not an expert, but it creates issues, right? So you're much better off backing it with dollars. So they had a mechanism splitting the euro-dollar risk. I mean, ripping it out from the stablecoin and giving it to people who were happy to short euro. So using perpetual futures. That was very interesting, a bit difficult to scale, a bit risky. So now I think they are moving to a CDP model, which is good, but actually it was super nice to be able to short euro with max leverage at that point. So anyway, that being said, I think there is a demand for other than dollar stablecoins, because when you see how the regulator in the US is behaving towards crypto, DeFi, stablecoins, whatever, right? And when you see how they behave in the normal traditional markets for anyone who uses dollar, I mean, in France, we've suffered from that a couple of times, right? Transaction happening in dollar in whatever country, whatever, and ends up having the US regulator saying, okay, this belongs to me or whatever, right? So the US dollar actually bears some inherent risk, which could contaminate stablecoin dollars, right? So I think there is a rationale for other stablecoins. Also, we've seen like massive price movements between, I mean, me, myself, I'm paid in dollars. I live in Europe. Euro went from 90 cents to $1.1 last year. So I lost 20% of my income, right? I think just this simple fact creates some demand, right? Also, there is a lot of noise those past few weeks about the BRICS currency. I don't know if you've heard about that. Very funny, very interesting. So yeah, I guess at some point that could be an interesting currency as well to have in DeFi. I don't know. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, all great points, but I take a rather pessimistic view that the current on-chain use of non-USD denominated stablecoins is for forex speculation, particularly for shorting the euro. For example, you mint AGEUR and dump it for USDC, or other ones. The on-chain demand for stablecoins will really mirror the real world demand, and I would love more than anything to see the end of US dollar hegemony, whether it's with BRICS or just back to the gold reserve standard. And but the reality is we're going to mirror those markets for the foreseeable future.
I think if we take euro dollar as an example, I honestly don't know why it hasn't gained ground. Is it because a certain protocol, let's say Angle or any, has not established enough liquidity for it, to make it easy for users, let's say, to mint it or redeem it, or just simply hold it, actually, or if it's just users probably just minted it to short, that's different. So we don't know if that's the case. So there isn't so some UX problems, or it is actually there isn't any demand on it. But if one use case, if I lived in Europe, I would want to be paid in euro, electronic kind of way, or some sort of derivative, because I live here. Like Uber say, you want to be paid, like you pay your rent in euro, you spend. So one use case. So I don't know why this is not a possibility. Is it because of this lack of liquidity? Is it because of lack of motivated user? we don't know. But for sure, like, there's some liquidity on, I think, Uniswap, for Uniswap v3 for the AG Euro. I think it had been pretty stable prior to the Euler hack, specifically because I think Angle used the Euler as a layer to optimize yield, or actually earn yield, using the money backing the stable coin. This is probably they're changing the design right now, or they have done that already. So yeah, it has some liquidity, but didn't have any lending markets. Didn't have any. I don't think majority of those protocols where you could process payments. They didn't list any kind of anything other than the dollar backed stablecoins. So it could be either the user experience, or just simply there's no demand for any stablecoin that is not backed by US dollars.
Yeah, I think Larry has the point on why there is not much demand for other dollar stablecoin, right? It's because 90% to maybe 95% of the international transfers are denominated in dollars in the real world, so it's normal that it would be the same in on-chain, right? However, I would be less pessimistic than you, right? I mean, if you look at, so why those international transfers are denominated in dollars? It's because dollars is the world reserve currency, right? It's more than 95% of the composition of reserves of any country, right? Even in Russia, it's still around 50% of the reserves. And if you look at historically how the composition of reserves evolved in the world over the past century, 100 years ago, it was 100% pounds, right? Sterling, or nearly 100%, right? And after the war, decolonization, etc., it progressively moved from the pound to the dollar, right? So obviously we're not talking a couple years from now, right? But a single century was enough to change that, right? And I think this century is seeing events which are as remarkable as the 20th. So obviously we don't have a third world war, right? Of course, but I think the fact that now the BRICS GDP exceeds the G7 plus GDP, like I think it's for a couple of years now, something like that. It's a massive change, and it will accelerate. And so we are not fully sure that in 50 years from now, the dollar will stay the basic reserve currency.
Well, like actually, interestingly, that for example, China and other countries, they have to invest in U.S. treasuries just in case the dollar loses value, because if you have dollar backing your currency as well, you would want your currency to go down with the dollar, not become more expensive, because then export gets more expensive, and all of a sudden you have a catastrophe on your end. So you have to devalue your local currency in response to dollar. That's why they invest, not because because they're stuck. Everyone is stuck. Everyone is the global reserve currency, and you have to buy it. So it's a perfect system they've set up. Yeah.
Mike might have some interesting perspective on the Turkish lira, which there is a on-chain stablecoin for, the NRZD, I think. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. Tribe. Yeah. Do you know anything about that?
No. Yeah, I know that in hyper-inflated economies like Turkey, and I think certain issues also in Argentina, but a lot of Turkish people have complained a lot, and they probably sought cryptocurrency as a refuge, a store of value, and I think that's on its own is a huge use case for users. And I think for people, the normal people, you wouldn't mind to own or to store their value in any of external stablecoins, be it US dollar or be it euro or whatever. as long as you trust the issuer. This becomes extremely important because if you have an issuer, a stablecoin issuer that backs, that doesn't have a transparent system, or they use collateral, or they keep their money at in a certain bank that is not to be trusted, or something like that, well then you also lose your money. So, but yeah.
Yeah, this is sort of like a meta even level conversation of like, what are kind of the main uses of like USD denominated stablecoins? This is just, for people around the world to get access to US dollars because it's the world's reserve currency. If that's the case, then the majority of the stablecoin adoption will be in whatever currency is the global reserve currency. But if it's in to facilitate commerce more broadly, then there's, a broader case to be made around, euro denominated stablecoins and likewise. So yeah, recognize that we only have a few minutes left. We'll kind of briefly summarize the conversation and then open up the audience for questions. But to kind of summarize what we talked about, we started off the conversation around discussing different peg mechanisms and the trade-offs there. For example, Mike outlined some of the design mechanism updates that Tsunami has made to kind of integrate both the reserve and income reserve and stability mechanisms. We then kind of talked about the role that other markets like lending markets and secondary markets kind of play in the peg mechanism, both in sort of diversifying the liquidity sources and driving more usage from being listed on lending protocols. And then we discussed different growth strategies for stable coins and stable coins beyond just the US dollar. But before we kind of open up the audience to questions, if anyone wants to contact any of you guys, what's the best contact info for them to do so?
Yeah, Tsunami, we have stand here. You can come to talk with us and discuss this our automated peg stability mechanism. With pleasure, we will discuss it. It's open source. We can talk about that. We have stand, and of course, after this talk, we will be here to chat.
Well, you can contact me at Silo Finance. Just go to Twitter and DM, and I'll respond to you or one of the team members.
Yeah, thank you, Mike and Tsunami, for hosting this again and for inviting us. This was a great discussion. But to get in touch with me, you can find Reserve Protocol on Twitter.
Yeah, same here. You can contact me on Twitter. You look for Uberb and or just go to the Telegram of StakeDAO. You can find it on the UI. And as long as you're not proposing an amazing marketing opportunity, you shouldn't have any issue listing opportunity or having 11 years of full stack dev experience. Normally, it should be okay.
Oh, and yeah, at Gauntlet, we're always excited to partner with more teams in the space. So if you're a developer in stablecoins or working around stablecoins, feel free to reach out to me at Paul J-Lei, J-L-E-I at Twitter, or just our Gauntlet Twitter. So yeah, we'll open up the floor for any questions from the audience. Guess we covered everything.
I have one question. What is the right way to ask it? There's certain protocols and teams that are working on store of value which aren't really pegged to anything. Like Olympus DAO would be the most known example of that. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, if you think that's a valuable thing to build, because that could be like an alternative to the USD taking up most of the show. Yeah.
Yeah, Ride's sort of in the same boat, where it's a really interesting idea. It's, a floating peg.
Sort of a floating peg reserve currency, Olympus and Rye. But they're sort of, I'd say their appeal is more niche at this point. Vitalik's a great fan of Rye. He's mentioned it a lot of times. And it sort of serves as a dampened USD in line with ETH price movements. And these are all really interesting experiments to have, and I think very worthwhile continuing to explore.
Yeah, I think unless I'm wrong, it's the end game for Maker, right? They want to be not pegged to the US dollar at the end, right? I don't know. We'll see. A lot of people tried that. If you think about it, Ether is already, or Bitcoin was supposed to be something like that, right? I guess we'll see. I don't know if you know Aladdin DAO is working on something like that. It's called F of X or FX. It's basically an Ether which is 10x less volatile, right? So if ETH does plus 10%, FX does plus 1%, right? So it's a like soft ETH, right? We'll see. I struggle to see the real demand for it, unfortunately. I think FPI was not uninteresting as well. It's an inflation adjusted stablecoin issued by Frax. So basically, so it's algorithmic, right? So it's not really collateralized, or at least the collateral has some lag compared to the supply. But it's a way to not suffer from inflation, still using stablecoins.
Yeah, I think particularly is a great example. It represents a basket of assets, and now you're trusting that these assets and the holdings that DAO is holding, gonna put them to work in a way that will accrue value to itself, and then keep increasing in value. I think it's a great way. They're trying to work on and similar to them. They're trying to make that token as a pretty much a unit of account for their community, where basically you just own it. And they try to even now, for example, on Silo, they have lending markets for Ohm for the users, because users trust Ohm. So you hold it, but now you want to leverage, you want to borrow, for example, USDC against it. So it becomes like a unit of account for their community. I don't have to exchange it for anything else. I can use it in multiple protocols, and because it accrues value, so you can expect a certain yield, could be kind of auto compounded to it without any staking, because you're just holding it. And but more or less you're relying on the DAO and the sensibility of the DAO of investing Ohm and the treasury itself, because Ohm becomes kind of representation, the abstract of everything that the DAO does.
Because everything resolves to the dollar, whether it's euros, Singaporean dollars, Turkish liras, just the same way as it's the settlement currency in global finance. And so just as people don't, convert their holdings to euros, an American wouldn't. They would never, someone living in America all their entire life has never interacted with an euro. That lessens the likewise lessens the on-chain appeal for euro. There are still niche use cases, speculation, and for citizens of the EU, it absolutely has uses, because you're going to transact in that exact currency. But I'm just talking in terms of dominance. It sort of explains why. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think as far as inventing and maintaining the tech, it's really the same question. It's exactly identical. Doesn't matter how you issue it and how you maintain it. The same questions, honestly. I think we've talked about the AG euro. I'm not sure how it's minted, and of Angle protocol. I'm not sure how it is minted and how the peg is maintained. But it's the same question. I think the same fundamentals apply to all of them. I think what we just talked about here is more of, is there a demand on it? Is there a use case? Because I mean, technically, debt is not denominated in euro at all. I mean, trading isn't even. But as far as maybe on retail level and at a wholesale level, maybe there are some use cases for users wanting to be paid, and some transaction to be settled, even maybe small merchants, whatever. But yeah.
Cool. Looks like time's up. But appreciate everyone coming, and yeah, we'll be available for more.
you.